Seventh Child Publishing presents Discovery Activities, Occupations, which is in the Family History Tricks and Tips playlist, Family History Activity Series. Please click on the links below to access the Seventh Child Publishing website and the Salt Lake Millcreek Family History Center web pages on the Family Search Research Wiki for more resources. Hello, I am Eileen Lentz, Temple and Family History Consultant and Trainer. As a consultant, I want to teach people how to understand their ancestors more fully so they can appreciate their talents and the ways they provided for their family. We can learn about principles that were important to them and perhaps why they made some of the choices they did. Learning about the occupations of your ancestors can help you answer many questions. As I was thinking about occupations in the scriptures, I thought about how many stories and parables in the scriptures use the occupation as background information or even the symbolism to teach gospel principles. An activity that might be interesting is to examine some scriptures that include occupations such as carpenters, soldiers and their leaders, farmers, planters and masters of the vineyards, metal workers, and especially shepherds. Discuss what lessons or principles are taught in these stories and parables. The occupation of your ancestors can be found in many different types of records. The image shown here is of a baptismal record, which includes a column for the quality, trade, or profession of the parent. Marriage records, birth and death records also often give this information. Census records, military records, city directories, or professional or trade records may also include this information. Newspapers, including obituaries, often list the occupation. Local histories or family histories and life sketches might include the occupation of your ancestor. When I know what occupation my ancestor had, I want to find out more about that occupation, what tools were needed, how they performed their tasks, and what principles they followed. I want to know the conditions they worked under for their time period and how it affected their family. I first do a Google search to see general resources that are available. I may have to adjust what I'm searching for to get the results that I'm looking for. For instance, when I searched for stonemason at first, I got a lot about the religious order, so I had to be more specific with tools at first. There are some occupation lists that give a short explanation of what different occupations were. The most complete detail about different occupations can be found on Wikipedia. Once I have a page for that, I start to search for images and YouTube videos that will show more detail about the skills and conditions your ancestors worked in during their time period. For this family history discovery activity, I'm going to use the example of my Hacking, Pearson, and Clark lines. James Hacking, my third great-grandfather, was a twine spinner. His third son and my second great-grandfather, James Hacking V, was a joiner or master carpenter. He often worked on construction with James Clark, also my second great-grandfather, who was a stonemason. Both their wives were the daughters of John Pearson, who was a weaver. After James Hacking V died in 1839, his widow James Pearson Hacking married John Fisher, who was a weaver. For a time, he took his stepsons, James and John Sampson Hacking, with him to work in the cotton mill factories. The older stepson, James Hacking VI, continued in that occupation, even after coming to America. I will explain how to find sources for finding more about these occupations, as I explained in the previous slide. I will also suggest some activities the family can do to learn a few skills their ancestors practiced. James Hacking, 1756 to 1836, was a twine spinner, which means that he made rope by spinning twine or fibers spun from different types of plant. He may have also used fiber from wool, but more than likely it was plant fibers. He had a cousin also named James Hacking who listed his occupation as a rope maker. I am unsure of the difference, but it is quite certain that my third great-grandfather made his ropes by twisting fibers. I remember my brother making rope out of baling twine that we had in abundance in our farm when he was in Scouts. I was not surprised to see that many of the online sources about making rope were from the Scouts. The first one I give here is from the Scout Pioneering website. I could not find the occupation of twine spinner on Wikipedia, but under the heading of rope, there is a lot of information about rope making, including the method of twisting or creating the rope and the history and usage of ropes. You can use the link here or below in the description. YouTube has lots of videos showing how to make ropes by twisting fibers or twine. I have 4 shown here that show different methods and tools or machines used. They all explain that the twine is twisted in one direction to create the thicker strand, and then those strands are twisted in the opposite direction to create the rope. In the first video, Coal Cracker Bushcraft shows how using a nail can yield a tool called a rope spinner to make a rope in the field from thin cordage. The second video shows more of the history of rope making and shows examples of different machines or tools that were used in different ages, including one that was demonstrated at Visby Market. A scout leader guides 3 boys creating a rope at a state fair using a different machine. And Yarrow Walligator demonstrates his homemade rope maker machine in his backyard. Each of these videos demonstrates some of the basic principles for making a rope by twisting. There are other methods for making ropes, but I want to stick to this one, since this is the method my ancestor used. I don't know what tools he used for sure, but I suspect it more closely resembled that shown in the second video. That video also showed a long building where long ropes were made. I think it was probably the case for him because he was a yeoman who owned at least 6 buildings at the time of his death, as recorded in his will. This rope making activity is done completely by hand and requires none of the tools or machines shown in the videos. However, it requires several people. So obtain a length of sisal, jute, or any other twisted fiber twine. Examine the twist of the twine to determine the direction of the twist already present. This twine will form the strand as illustrated left. Cut 3 equal lengths, whatever you think your people can work with, although initially 10 feet should suffice. Tie a small loop in one end of each strand. A bowline knot big enough to slip a finger or a stick through will work. Position one person to hold all 3 strands at one end. The responsibility here is to hold the tension. Give each of 3 other people the loose ends to hold and twist. Remember, opposite direction of the yarn to tighten the natural twist of the twine. They may wish to tie it to a stick to make turning the strand easier. Hold tension and do not let the strand kink. Once each strand is sufficiently twisted to tighten, hold tension on each line and bring the loose ends together without losing the twist or tension. Twist the 3 together in the opposite direction while holding tension on the whole thing. The memory of the fibers will produce a simple 3-strand rope. Use an extra hand or 2 to assure that things lay up evenly. Set the twist by pulling on the ends and finish by lashing the ends, tying a knot, or taping the ends so they don't fray. The twist may be reversed of the illustrations depending on the twine that you use. The next occupation of my ancestors that we will look at is the joiner, which was the occupation of my second great-grandfather, James Hacking. According to the old occupations names list, a joiner is a skilled carpenter, capable of finer work than a plain carpenter, i.e. skilled in making joints for furniture making. The Wikipedia page for joiner says a joiner is an artisan who builds things by joining pieces of wood, particularly lighter and more ornamental work than that done by a carpenter, including furniture and fittings of a house, ship, etc. Joiners may work in a workshop because the formation of various joints is made easier by the use of non-portable power machinery or on job site. The joiner usually produces items such as interior and exterior doors, windows, stairs, tables, bookshelves, cabinets, furniture, etc. Use the link to learn more detail and the history of joinery. There are several facts about James Hacking V and his occupation that I knew about before I started this activity. I knew he had apprenticed as a young man. My sister suggested that this was with his father-in-law, but his father-in-law was a weaver, not a joiner. Perhaps I can look through apprentice records for nearby joiners and discover who he apprenticed with. James made friends with another James, who was an apprentice for a stonemason. James Clark was a few years younger, but they became fast friends. James Hacking began dating Elizabeth Pearson, and James Clark began dating Jane Pearson. As they got to know each other, they each fell in love with the opposite sister and married their true loves. They remained close friends their whole lives. They worked together on many construction sites, including the St. Saviour Church in Bamber Bridge near Croydon, where James and Jane's youngest child, Anne Hacking, was born, baptized, died, and was buried when she was still a baby. James Hacking died later that year in September 1839. St. Saviour's Church was built in 1836 and 1837, but as I was studying this, the Spirit whispered to me that he continued to work on the church and other buildings and furnishings associated with it after 1837. I also received an answer about his death. When I was younger, my Aunt Laverne Hacking, who was a very important researcher for our family, had told me that James had died after falling from a building. However, when I found his death record, it said that he died from consumption. As I was looking at different images of the church, I was told by the Spirit that the reason he fell from the church building was because he was so sick with consumption at the time. I also learned from the stories passed down from the family that James was a very talented woodworker. He even built violins and high-quality cabinets. Those pictured here are not his constructions, but are from the same time period. I decided to find out more about what a joiner does by watching some YouTube videos about it. Here are 5 that I chose to view with the idea that I could understand how he did his craft, what tools he would use, and how he would make decisions. I wanted to get into his head. In my mind, I could sense my great-great-grandfather pumping the foot pedal to turn the lathe so he could hold the chisel at the perfect angle to shape the legs of the desk he had been commissioned to make for the church he was building. I could see him create the dovetail joints that fit perfectly together. I could sense his satisfaction as he used the planer to smooth the wood and fill his shop with the wood curls. I could feel him bearing his testimony that the quality of his work came from his desire to honor God with his craft. Several of my ancestors were weavers, some of them being part of the large industrial revolution that changed from an industry in the home to large cotton mills with many overworked factory workers, including young children. My great-grandfather, John Sampson Hacking, was one of those children. He was taken with his stepfather, John Fisher, to work in a large cotton mill. John Sampson's older brother, James, and his wife both worked in a cotton mill before they immigrated to America in 1849, and he worked in the coal mines around St. Louis. After James came home to his family after he fought in the American Civil War, he moved his family to Massachusetts to work in the cotton mills there. He only had daughters, and they joined him working in this industry. Some of my ancestors in early generations were weavers, but it is probably more likely that they used home looms to make cloth. A history of John Sampson Hacking, written by his daughter-in-law and my grandmother, Martha Elnora Wilcox Hacking, was published in the John Sampson Hacking Family Bulletin in 1954. Here is an excerpt that talks about his experience in the cotton mill. 1 year after the death of her husband, Jane Hacking married John Fisher, who was a weaver by trade. At the age of 6 years, John was set to the task of winding bobbins for his stepfather, a task which became very tiresome before the day was through. Mr. Fisher contracted consumption, and unable to work at his trade, he applied to the parish for easier work so that he could support his family. Instead of being given a job, he was sent to the poorhouse. John, being too young to do other work than winding bobbins, was sent with him. Here they were separated into different wards. The boys slept 4 to a bed. The men were required to break rocks for macadamizing the roads. It was soon discovered that Mr. Fisher was from another shire, so they were discharged. When John was 7 years old, he began to work in a cotton mills, and at the age of 11, he was chosen from a group of 360 boys to run the first self-acting bobbins ever to be used. John and the other boys were now allowed to work half a day and attend school the other half. And so, in his 11th year, he got 3 months schooling, all he ever had. The first 3 videos show the art of weaving and some examples of historic looms. The last 2 videos describe the working of machines in the big factories or cotton mills and the hard conditions and social changes that took place that my ancestors participated in the 19th century in England and America. The harsh conditions and risk were astounding, but I also learned of the skill they developed and the strong work ethic they demonstrated. Even though my great-grandfather only had 3 months of formal education, working in the cotton mill developed his mind and creative thinking he used to find success in every difficult circumstance he encountered in life. While he did not continue in that industry like his big brother, he nevertheless benefited from what he learned there. When he was only 14 years old, he and his brother worked in the coal mines around St. Louis. They could dig out more coal than any other 2 men because they would dig out under the coal the night before, so it would be loosened the next day. He was part of a surveying party, which he observed a doctor as he operated on those injured from the party. Later, his first aid saved life and limb of many in his community. Along with his farm, he had a community store. When the Army left the area to go fight the Civil War, John Sampson salvaged a lot of their abandoned goods to bless his community. There are many more examples, but as a teacher, one of my favorites was how hard he worked to get teachers from BYU to teach the students in Cedar Fort. He understood the value of education, even though he could not read himself. He was a very intelligent man with big doses of common sense and heart. Learning about the occupation of weaving helped me understand what informed his skills, talents, and character traits. When I was growing up, I learned how to weave cloth and baskets using several different devices and techniques. The bottom image is an example of one of them. I remember how excited I was to receive a loom similar to the top image for Christmas one year. Learning how to weave is an awesome skill to develop, so Google weaving activities to find one that fits your family. The 2 videos show how wool and linen yarn are made. Do activities as a family that will help you understand the skills involved in weaving and how your ancestors were affected by the industry. See if you might have talents associated with weaving that you might have inherited from them or other connections you might have had with them. Stonemasonry was actually the first occupation of my ancestors that I researched. As mentioned earlier, when we talked about his good friend James Hacking being a joiner, They met on construction projects when James Clark was an apprentice. Unfortunately, I had a hard time finding the full history of James Clark, so I decided to research stonemasonry to learn more about him, to write a more complete history about him and his family. I first looked on Family Search Research Wiki for a short description of the occupation of stonemason, which is the first link described as the art of hewing or squaring stones and marble. Check the link for a more complete description. The crowning work of James Clark was that he worked as a stonemason on the Salt Lake Temple. He was called to take his team of oxen and cut and haul the stones in building the temple, which he did faithfully. The bottom image shows stonemasons working on the Salt Lake Temple. As with his friend James Hacking V, I knew several facts about James Clark and his occupation before I started this video. I knew he had apprenticed as a young man. In fact, while trying to document who his biological father was, I discovered that his biological father was a stonemason named John Dawson. John Dawson was required to pay for the support of James Clark, so it only makes sense that John Dawson would teach his sons his trade. John taught several of his sons, including James Clark, to be stonemasons. James Clark also taught his sons to be stonemasons, although only James Pearson Clark lived to become a stonemason. Remember the discussion about James Clark's friendship and relationship with James Hacking earlier in this video? Remember that their friendship started when they were working on different construction sites as apprentices. They remained friends their whole lives. They worked together on many construction sites, including St. Saviour's Church in Bamberg Bridge near Corydon, as explained earlier. The reason I know this last statement is true is because my two great-grandfathers told me through the power of the Holy Ghost as I was working on this video. As with the other occupations discussed, I was visited by my ancestors as I researched each occupation, who explained their own story as I learned about in their life's work. I found these 3 videos to be fascinating and very informative about principles and tools used by stonemasons or stone carvers. Each one helped me understand and appreciate how my stonemason ancestors worked. Even though Chris Pelliateri, or whatever you say his name, is a stone carver, he talks about the principles that my ancestors were using as they chose which tools to use according to the characteristics of the stones they were trying to fashion. This is the pattern I used to plan the discovery activity of my ancestors' occupations. First, ask a parent or grandparent to tell about their own occupation or the occupations of other ancestors. Research the occupations to discover what tools were used, what skills and talents were needed, and what your ancestors accomplished in their occupation. Try one of the skills or activities your ancestors used in their occupation. Write in your journal or make an audio or video recording of your experience and how it helped you to understand your ancestor better. I am so grateful that I did this discovery activity about these 4 occupations of my ancestors. I have learned much more about my ancestors, their skills, talents, and character. I have learned some new skills and appreciation for people who serve their community in these 4 occupations. But most of all, I experienced an overwhelming surge of love for each of these gentlemen. I felt their presence and their love and appreciation for me and their many descendants. I know they each worked hard to provide for their family and leave their descendants with a heritage of strong work ethic and a desire to perfect their skills and talents. I learned of their great faith in God and their desire to honor Him through their work. I learned answers to many of the questions I had pondered for many years. As you select the occupations of your ancestors to research, you will have your own unique experience. However, I can promise you that you will benefit greatly, and it will turn your heart to them. Thank you for watching the video Discovery Activities Occupations, which is in the Family History Tricks and Tips playlist, Family History Activity Series. I hope you will choose to do this activity with your ancestors and their occupations. Please use what I did to help you find resources and information to match your family. Use my methods as a pattern, but expand them to include your own unique talents and circumstances. The purpose of this video is to help you enjoy the benefits of researching your own ancestors' occupations. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And please share with others on Facebook and your other social media accounts. Please help to spread this important message.